A viewer on my last video wrote something that stopped me cold. He said, "The Carpenter's rulebook was so secret that even Thomas Jefferson couldn't access it? Sounds similar to another secret society whose members must keep its secrets under penalty of death. But instead of carpentry, they're called Masons." He was more right than he knew. When I started researching the Carpenter's Company, I kept finding connections to Freemasonry. Not the conspiracy version you see on late-night YouTube. Not the Illuminati puppet master nonsense. The construction version. The version nobody talks about because it's actually stranger than any conspiracy. See, the original Freemasons weren't philosophers or bankers or politicians. They were stonemasons. Actual stonemasons. Men who cut rock and built cathedrals with their hands. And somewhere between the 1400s and 1717, something changed. The builders disappeared, the bankers took over, and the construction knowledge that built the greatest structures in human history vanished with them. I want to tell you what I found. The medieval stonemason guilds operated exactly like the Carpenter's Company I covered in my last video. Same structure, same secrecy, same jealous protection of trade knowledge, but the stonemasons had something the Carpenters didn't. They had cipher manuscripts. The oldest surviving Masonic document is called the Regius manuscript. It dates to around 1390. That's more than 100 years before Columbus sailed anywhere. And when you look at this manuscript, you realize something fascinating. It's written in Middle English verse, almost like a poem, but encoded with references that only guild members would understand. The Regius manuscript lays out the legendary history of Masonry, tracing the craft back to Egypt and the building of Solomon's Temple. It describes 15 articles and 15 points that govern the behavior of Masons. It establishes the hierarchy of master, fellow, and apprentice. But hidden within these rules are geometric principles. Construction secrets. The actual knowledge that allowed illiterate craftsmen to build structures that still stand 800 years later. 50 years after the Regius manuscript, another document appeared. The Cook manuscript, dated around 1450. This one goes even deeper. It contains what scholars call the charges of Masonry, the obligations that bound every member. But it also contains mathematical principles dressed up as moral instruction. Here's what nobody tells you about Gothic cathedrals. The men who built them couldn't read or write. They had no formal education. They possessed no modern engineering degrees or computer modeling software. Yet they created structures so precisely calculated that modern engineers struggle to explain how they achieved it. Notre Dame Cathedral has a nave vault that rises 115 feet. The walls are almost entirely glass because the weight is distributed through flying buttresses in a way that shouldn't work according to basic physics. The stone was cut so precisely that no mortar was needed in many sections. The geometry is so perfect that when you stand inside, the proportions trigger something in the human nervous system. You feel awe whether you believe in God or not. The stonemasons who built these structures learned their trade through a 7-year apprenticeship. They lived with their masters. They worked stone from dawn to dusk. And somewhere in that process, they absorbed knowledge that was never written down in plain language. It existed only in cipher manuscripts, in oral tradition, and in the muscle memory of men who spent decades perfecting a single craft. The guild system protected this knowledge fiercely. Outsiders couldn't learn the trade. Members couldn't share secrets with anyone outside the craft. The geometry of Gothic construction was considered sacred, both spiritually and economically. If everyone knew how to build cathedrals, cathedral builders wouldn't be wealthy. This system worked for centuries. From the 11th century through the 16th century, inoperative masonry guilds controlled who could build in stone across Europe. They had lodges in every major city. They had their cipher manuscripts and their oral traditions and their carefully guarded techniques. Then something happened in 1717 that changed everything. 4 lodges in London decided to merge. They gathered at a pub called the Goose and Gridiron Ale House near St. Paul's Cathedral, and on that day they formed what they called the Grand Lodge of England. This moment is considered the birth of modern Freemasonry. But here's what the ceremony actually represented. Those 4 lodges weren't composed of stonemasons. They were gentlemen, merchants, politicians, men who had never touched a chisel in their lives. Speculative masonry replaced operative masonry. The tools became symbols. The square and compass that once measured actual stone now represented moral principles. The working rituals that once taught construction techniques now taught philosophical lessons about virtue and brotherhood. The transition sounds natural when you read about it in history books. Guilds evolve. Trades become traditions. Practical knowledge becomes abstract wisdom. But when you look closer, something doesn't add up. The construction knowledge never transferred. The speculative lodges kept the rituals. They kept the symbols. They kept the hierarchy of apprentice, fellow, and master. But they never received the geometric secrets. The cipher manuscripts were never decoded for the new members. The oral traditions about cathedral construction were never passed down. The last operative stonemasons, the men who actually knew how to build like their medieval ancestors, died without teaching their secrets to the speculative lodges that claimed their heritage. Think about that for a moment. The entire purpose of the guild system was protecting and transmitting knowledge across generations, master to apprentice for centuries. And in 1717, that chain broke. The new Freemasons inherited the form of the tradition without its substance. One commenter on my Carpenter's video put it perfectly. He wrote, "The stained glass alone is insanely complicated and beyond what we're told about tools and processes of that age." He was talking about cathedral windows, glass that was colored using techniques we still don't fully understand, shapes cut without modern tools, lid joining methods that modern craftsmen can replicate but can't explain. The same is true for the stone itself. Medieval masons cut rock without power tools. They calculated load distribution without computers. They built structures to precise astronomical alignments without GPS or laser levels. And the knowledge of how they did it was supposed to live in the lodges. But it doesn't. Modern Freemasons perform rituals that reference Solomon's Temple and Egyptian geometry. They speak in symbolic language about squares and compasses and levels, yet none of them can actually build a Gothic cathedral. The knowledge died with the operative masons. This pattern might sound familiar if you watched my video on the Carpenters Company. The same guild secrecy, the same eventual transition from craftsmen to gentlemen, the same mysterious loss of actual trade knowledge, the same timing, and the late 1600s and early 1700s saw guild after guild transform from operative to speculative, from builders to bankers, from craftsmen to club members. It happened with the Carpenters. It happened with the Masons. It happened across Europe, almost simultaneously. Maybe I'm reading too much into this. Maybe the transition was natural evolution. Craft guilds probably always become social clubs eventually. Economic conditions change, trades become obsolete or industrialized, organizations adapt or die. The speculative Freemasons adapted by becoming something new, and yet the cipher manuscripts remain undecoded. The Regius manuscript and the Cook manuscript are available to scholars. You can view them online. Academics have studied them for centuries, but the geometric principles hidden within them have never been fully extracted. Now we can read the words. We can translate the Middle English. But the actual construction knowledge they encoded remains locked. Modern engineers have analyzed Gothic cathedrals using every tool available. They've created computer models, they've measured stress distributions, they've calculated weight loads, and their consistent conclusion is that medieval builders knew things we don't understand. The structures should work according to physics, but the margins are too tight. The precision is too perfect. There's something in the geometry that modern analysis can't fully explain. Why can't we replicate it? We have better tools, we have more sophisticated mathematics, we have materials science the medieval world never dreamed of. Yet when modern builders attempt to create Gothic structures, they never quite achieve the same effect. The proportions feel off. The acoustic properties differ. Something is missing. Why did the construction secrets never transfer to the speculative lodges? The whole point of Freemasonry is supposed to be preserving and transmitting ancient wisdom. If the operative Masons joined the speculative lodges, why didn't they teach what they knew? Some historians argue the operative Masons were already dying out by 1717. The last generation of traditional stonemasons chose not to share their knowledge with gentlemen who would never build anything. The secrets died with them out of spite or despair, or simply because there was no one worthy to receive them. But that explanation assumes the Masons made a conscious choice to let their knowledge disappear. It assumes they looked at centuries of carefully preserved craft tradition and decided to end it rather than adapt it. Why would builders who spent their lives protecting knowledge choose extinction over transmission? Why did the shift from operative to speculative happen at exactly the same moment across multiple guilds in multiple trades? Why did the builders become bankers in the same century that every other replacement we've documented occurred? I don't have answers. I'm not claiming the Illuminati erased construction knowledge or that aliens built the cathedrals. I'm pointing at a historical pattern that nobody talks about. The men who built the greatest structures in European history belonged to secret societies. Those societies protected construction knowledge in cipher manuscripts for centuries. In the early 1700s, those societies transformed from craft guilds into philosophical clubs. The construction knowledge vanished. The gentlemen kept the symbols and forgot what they meant. Today, Freemasons worldwide perform rituals that reference ancient building techniques. They speak of sacred geometry and Solomon's Temple and the lost secrets of the craft. But they can't actually build anything. The knowledge they claim to protect no longer exists in their possession. The cipher manuscripts sit in museums, still partially unread. The cathedrals still stand, still unexplained. And somewhere between 1390 and 1717, something was lost that we've never recovered. I started this research looking for connections between guild secrecy and construction knowledge. What I found instead was a pattern. Builders replaced by bankers, craftsmen replaced by philosophers. Knowledge replaced by symbols. The question isn't whether this happened. The historical record is clear. The question is why. And whether whatever was lost can ever be found again.